Afternoon and welcome again to our Wednesday webinar. Thank you for joining us, whether you're watching this live or as a recording later on. I'm Tim Ferguson and I'm part of the ministries team at Baptist Together. Today our title is Mental Health and Social Distancing. But before we talk about that, I want to let you know what's coming up. So next week our guests will be three theologians. Paul Fiddis and Anthony Reddy from Regent's Park College and Sally Nelson from St Hild College. And they're going to be discussing what the church is when it cannot meet. How do we embody Christ when we cannot physically be present with each other or out in our communities? So that's 1 p.m. Wednesday, the 27th of May. And then on the 3rd of June, we will be discussing how best we support those dealing with grief and bereavement. So that's what's coming up. All the details are, of course, on our webinars page on the Baptist Together website. But today we're going to look at mental health. And I do just want to say before we begin that those who may be joining me in a moment are carers and chaplains, if you like, people who support others with mental health. None of the contributors today are mental health medical professionals. And if you are here today looking for help with your own specific mental health problems, then we do encourage you, first of all, to access support through your GP. Our emphasis today is on simple strategies that we can use to care for those with mental health issues. So I'm delighted to be joined by four contributors. First of all, Sarah Fegredo. You can see there joining me on the screen. And Sarah is a Baptist minister and also runs a Renew Wellbeing space. So welcome to you, Sarah. And I just wonder whether you could perhaps tell us what a Renew Wellbeing space does.
Well, a Renew Wellbeing space is, we say it's quiet shared spaces where it's okay not to be okay. So it's somewhere people can come in real life before lockdown to share hobbies, to be part of a community and to join in with some helpful habits that help support mental and emotional well-being. It's quite a simple idea, but it works really well.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And just to add in also, Nikki and Stuart, who are joining us, and they're mental health chaplains. Now, Stuart and Nikki, I wonder whether, again, you could just tell us perhaps in what context you work, where you work, and what is it you do?
I'm a chaplain at St Andrew's Healthcare, which is a large independent mental health hospital based here in Northampton, but with other branches around the country. And I work part-time. I've worked there for 8 years.
I'm also a mental health chaplain. I'm full-time in Northampton in a different hospital, in an NHS hospital. 10 wards, people stay various lengths of time, but in and out, usually in for about sort of 3 weeks, typical stay, some people longer, also supporting some people in the community.
Okay, well, thank you, Stuart and Nikki and Sarah for joining me today. However, we do have a fourth contributor. They're going to remain anonymous. So this is a woman who suffers herself from anxiety and depression. And we're going to listen, first of all, to her experience of lockdown. Now, the recording is about 7 minutes long. I do apologise that you'll be looking at a static screen for that time, but I think her reflections are well worth hearing. So if you just bear with me, I'm going to press a few buttons and we will hopefully hear this person's story.
Hi there. I've been asked to share a little bit about what it's like in lockdown when you struggle with mental health. I'm going to speak from my own personal perspective. Whilst what I share may not be true for every individual struggling with mental health issues, I do know that many feel and experience similar things to me. So I hope that some of what I say will be helpful for you in supporting others who may be struggling at this time of uncertainty. To give you just a brief overview, I live on my own. I'm a Christian and have been so for many years, and I also struggle with depression and anxiety. Through the lens of these struggles, I've battled for years with not feeling good enough for God and people, and have faced accusations of my faith not being real or strong enough, or I wouldn't have mental health issues in the first place. I'm telling you these things not to get into a theological discussion about them, but to help you see the platform from which I am experiencing lockdown. I call my mental health struggles my monster, to separate it from me. Yes, it is a real part of my everyday existence, but it isn't all of me, and that's important for me to hold on to. So I hope you don't mind if I call it that here too, as it helps me share with you, whilst at the same time keeping some distance between myself and it. Just as the word coronavirus was becoming commonplace around the world, I heard that a close family member was very poorly with cancer. At the same time as this, I was experiencing the beginnings of a downward spiral into an episode of depression.
I'm just going to come back in. I gather some people can't hear the sound. Sarah, is that correct? Can you just confirm? Could you not hear it?
I couldn't hear it, no. I heard it to a point and then it went.
I'm so sorry. I will try again. And if, again, you could just let me know if it doesn't work. But we'll go back to the beginning. I do apologise. We'll just give this one further go. Do give me a thumbs up, Sarah, if you can hear this.
Hi there. I've been asked to share a little bit about what it's like in lockdown when you struggle with mental health. I'm going to speak from my own personal perspective. Whilst what I share may not be true for every individual struggling with mental health issues, I do know that many feel and experience similar things to me. So I hope that some of what I say will be helpful for you in supporting others who may be struggling at this time of uncertainty. To give you just a brief overview, I live on my own. I'm a Christian and have been so for many years, and I also struggle with depression and anxiety. Through the lens of these struggles, I've battled for years with not feeling good enough for God and people, and have faced accusations of my faith not being real or strong enough, or I wouldn't have mental health issues in the first place. I'm telling you these things not to get into a theological discussion about them, but to help you see the platform from which I am experiencing lockdown. I call my mental health struggles my monster, to separate it from me. Yes, it is a real part of my everyday existence, but it isn't all of me, and that's important for me to hold on to. So I hope you don't mind if I call it that here too, as it helps me share with you, whilst at the same time keeping some distance between myself and it. Just as the word coronavirus was becoming commonplace around the world, I heard that a close family member was very poorly with cancer. At the same time as this, I was experiencing the beginnings of a downward spiral into an episode of depression. The combination of these events left me very wobbly, and then lockdown was announced. Not good timing. For me, when I'm struggling with my monster, I withdraw from people. Normally, this is balanced out a little by forcing myself to get to work. But in the current situation of lockdown, where I'm working from home, I can go days without seeing or speaking to another person. I'll be completely honest with you, some days I'm relieved because I don't have to face anyone. Those days when getting out of bed feels like climbing Mount Everest and getting washed and dressed with these words I don't understand anymore. It's a relief to not have to put myself through that. But there is a flip side. That's when my monster starts tormenting, telling me I'm not good enough because I can't even get washed. Or I'm not good enough because I'm comfort eating, which leads then to hating the way I look even more, which then compounds the unhelpful thoughts about myself. Or I'm rubbish because my work wasn't good enough today, and so it goes on. Continuing on from this, feelings of loneliness are a dominant companion, even though, as I've already said, not seeing people can be a relief. I live on my own, so I'm sharing from that perspective. I'm not for one moment saying that it's easier being in lockdown with others, for I know that brings its own difficulties. But I can only speak with certainty about what it's like for me. So please do forgive me if it feels a bit biased. Being alone in lockdown at times intensifies my monster. There's only my voice speaking, and it's not always saying the most helpful things. It's a strange thing. Even though I know it's not personal and I'm on my own because the government has told the entire country that they can't see anyone outside of their household, when my monster is raging, it certainly feels personal. For me, those beliefs that everyone is better off without me anyway start to feel real. My monster leads me down a path of destruction where I start to believe that my friends and family must be so glad to have a break from me, that I deserve to be on my own because ... And the end of that sentence changes daily, even hourly at times. Then comes the undoing of months and months of hard work around trying to live a normal life that engages with and contributes to society. For you see, hiding at home is the default position when my monster is raging. So I have to fight against it, that if I'm going to hold down the job, pay my bills, have friends, see my family. So in this current crisis of being in lockdown, the longer I stay in, the harder the thought of leaving the house begins to feel. The longer it goes on, the more frightening finding a way to return to normal feels. What seems like a positive in being able to lock myself in the house is in truth the complete opposite. The technology we have right now is amazing and is helping people to connect so much. But if your mental health isn't good, it can feel like a pressure to accept calls and to speak when you least feel like it, because you know that people know you're at home, so they might think it rude if you don't answer. In a way, you are more accessible now than ever before, which can make the bad days even worse, because there's nowhere to hide. So I try to go to my coping strategies to hold back the wave of panic that is threatening. The thing is, I find while in isolation, most of the coping strategies that I've discovered and worked on over the years aren't possible to do right now. Things like having a daily routine that makes me leave the house and interact with people, seeing safe friends, having safe places to escape to when things are tough and things like that. Yet finding new coping strategies isn't that easy because they have to conform to externally imposed restrictions. In other words, everything that comes with lockdown that the government tells you you have to do. And there's no time to test them out. You just have to react rather than prepare and choose a response. And that's really tough.
Well, thank you to our unseen contributor for her insights. I hope that was useful to you as you just think about what it might be like at the moment to be struggling with mental health and to then be facing that lack of contact with other people. So I'm going to ask Nikki, first of all, you work in mental health in the community. So is this lady's story typical, and how has lockdown affected those in the community who need help with their mental health?
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's a huge range and everybody's story is different, and it's hard to make generalizations and assumptions, but there are lots of things that she talks about which I hear coming up again, time and time again, really. And I think it's changed a bit as lockdown's gone on. I think at first there was quite a lot of people feeling a sense of relief, and it's actually quite nice not to have some of those pressures of life that are around. But as time have gone on, people have found it harder. And I think particularly the points she made about those hard-won routines, people work really hard at managing their mental health, and they rely on things, they learn what works for them, maybe going out for long walks in the country, seeing particular friends regularly, volunteering, going to church, going to certain groups, and have those things taken away means it all starts to fall apart quite easily. And also the worries of life generally in a time of change, they're always harder. We're all finding, aren't we? But the things about money, are you still going to have a job? Are you going to be able to pay the mortgage? Strains in relationships, they all become more intense because of the effects of lockdown. And I think those things take their toll on all of us, don't they? But if mental health is something you've always struggled with, it is particularly hard.
Yeah, okay. And presumably we're seeing more people at the moment with mental health issues. I mean, people have talked about there being something like an increase, or even people have used emotive language such as a tidal wave of mental health issues arising. Is that something that is overplayed, or do you think that there is some truth in that?
I think we just have to ask ourselves what's our role of our mental health at the moment, and we're all aware it's not as easy as it has been, and that's reflected. I don't think we're having any particularly more admissions. It's just the way it is. People manage it in different ways, but I think it will change as time goes on. Things you cope with at first become more difficult as things happen, and I think we need to be particularly aware. Church communities are hugely important for mental health, regardless of anything to do with faith in a way. They're places where people can have a role, where they can be accepted, where they can meet all different sorts of people, and hopefully often be in a very non-judgmental and supportive way. And if you lose that, that's a big thing. And if we try and ease things as lockdown decreases, we have to do that really, really well to try and stop the anxiety, to help people be honest. I think there's something about the lockdown time which is making us all really be more honest with ourselves about what matters, and suddenly finding, is there anything left when we take away the busyness? And there's something, I've learned a lot from working with people who struggle with their mental health. There's a huge ability to be honest and to, ask real questions, just like the psalmists do. And I think, as a church community, we offer a real place where we have that sense of belonging as who we are, with all our, warts and all, with all our needs, and to be gentle with one another as we try and support each other still.
If I introduce Sarah there, I mean, Sarah, you're a Baptist minister pastoring a range of people clearly, but also you have this Renew Wellbeing space, which is specifically aimed at providing support for people with mental health issues. Are there some simple ways that you can immediately say things that we can do to assist and help?
Yes, I run Renew 67 in Hugglescote, and it's really building on the sort of the values of Renew, which is about being with people rather than doing to them. So, as Nikki said, about being honest about our own struggles, and sharing our journeys and sharing the things that have worked for us. So quiet habits that take care of our well-being, sharing those, supporting people, developing those. So we encourage people to bring their own hobbies along, to share those with one another, to have moments of quiet reflection and prayer. We have prayer at the heart of our Renew spaces, and that's for people of all faiths and none. Excuse me. And that helps people, and so we are really sharing what's working for us as we take care of our own mental and emotional well-being.
Okay, and to introduce this, Stuart as well. You're working in a hospital with people who have been admitted for mental health issues, and as a chaplain, you're doing this day in, day out. I mean, would you say there is one key thing that we can do as, I guess, much more amateur practitioners here, just in our support for those we're caring for?
I think the longer I've gone on, the more experience I've gained, the more I have become confident that simply listening to people is the most powerful thing we can do. To give them undivided attention, to let them know that our time is theirs, and to go let them lead the conversation, to go wherever they want to take us. And it doesn't feel smart, because you're in a sense, you're coming as the audience to the person you're with. You're going to listen to them, so it doesn't feel like you've got some wonderful therapy in your pocket that you can roll out. So you don't feel a terribly useful person necessarily. But what we all need is for people around us to know us and to understand us in a sympathetic and a friendly way. And for us to be able to just give attention to people. It's a bit like going on a walk with somebody and letting them take us where they choose and show us what they choose. But you show an interest. You say, oh, this looks interesting. Are we near such and such a place? And so you reflect on the walk with them. But you go as I think if you listen well, you go as a guest, and let them set the pace. And I think that matters more than anything.
So simple skills rather than any great clever strategies.
The difficult thing is having confidence in something so simple.
Yes.
And I guess this takes time as well. So there is a time commitment here to walking with people in that way. Yeah.
Yes, you have to try and appear unrushed in a world where we all, I think, feel the need to look incredibly busy and important. And so you have to be able to change gear and give the impression that you've got nothing in the diary. Well, we probably haven't got anything in the diary for the next few weeks at the moment. But to be a good listener, it's to be extravagant with time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask Sarah another question in a moment, but can I just remind people, do use the chat bar that you've got to put some comments in if you want. We will come back to those a bit later on. So do use that and ask the questions that you want to ask, and hopefully we'll address them in a little while. But Sarah, to turn to you, I know that much of your ministry experience has been with children and young people, and I think before you were pastoral minister of a church, you were a youth worker. I think that's correct.
Yes, that's right.
So just tell us a little bit, mental health for children and young people, and whether they are affected in particular ways by the lockdown and what we're facing now.
I think they're affected by all the same things that we've talked about. But I think for them as particularly, they have lost their support networks, as we all have. But I think school plays a big part in young people's lives. So the teachers that will have supported them and their friends and their friendship groups. I think what I'm hearing from my youth work colleagues is that young people are struggling with the loss of their significant markers and transitions. So students, young people at particular stages, those leaving primary school, are not having the markers that said you are moving on now. So they will go on to their next stage of education, possibly in September, without ever having had a school party at the primary school and then visits to the secondary school. They've lost all of that. I think they're struggling with seeing their parents struggling and not knowing how to deal with that, and dealing with strange feelings that they can't place. So someone told me that their son was feeling really angry but couldn't identify why. I think they're facing existential fear that they perhaps wouldn't have done. And maybe alongside that, the first bereavements of their lives. I think we expect to lose a grandparent, but possibly losing several and other relatives in a very short space of time, but without the rites of passage that we all need. So not having a proper funeral to go to. I think young people have got a lot of uncertainty about what their next steps are in their lives. So, you can imagine a situation where a student finishing their A-levels now is thinking, well, what will university look like for me? Because I won't be able to go there. So will I stay in my childhood bedroom trying to do grown-up university? I think it's those kind of things, particularly for young people.
So again, many people watching will not be youth workers and trained in any way, but will know young people in their churches. So simple strategies, again, things that we might be able to do to help them, Sarah?
Well, I think, as Stuart has said, giving them time. A lot of my colleagues have moved over to using Zoom for youth groups, and I think giving young people time to process and talk in a non-judgmental way is what we all need, and I think young people do. So well done to my colleagues who are working at that and giving young people space to think and talk and trying to think of creative ways to help them mark transitions and support them where they're not able to do that. But also there are a lot of resources available. I've passed on to Tim a whole load of links of places and organisations that young people can contact direct, places like Childline, National Youth Agency, etc., and they'll all be on the web page. There is a lot of support out there, and if you are supporting young people, then you can signpost them to those places. But I think what Stuart said about giving them space to talk and listen and value them. Yeah,
okay. So I've just popped on the comments box. There's a link there. It actually takes you to the webinar page that you may have navigated to get to this webinar, and there are some details and some links already up, which you can have a look at, particularly for groups and websites that support young people. I just want to say also, again, a reminder, in 2 weeks' time, we are looking at grief, bereavement, and one of the people taking part in that webinar is a specialist in helping children and young people with loss. And so that might be something worth coming back to if that's a particular situation you're presented with. Can I just stay with you, Sarah, just for one moment? So again, thinking a little bit more about the Renew Wellbeing spaces. At the moment, clearly, they're all closed for obvious reasons. But as we come out of lockdown, if a church wanted to very explicitly provide a space for helping people with mental health, how would they go about that? How can they access Renew, and what would they need to do?
Well, they can contact us on our website, which is renewwellbeing.org.uk. And we can offer online training. We are beginning to recognise that this tidal wave of mental health issues is going to be big. So churches are already preparing, and we've made training available online. So if you're a church that's thinking, hey, we need to get ready for this, we have got training ready for you if you would like to come and join in with the Renew space. Some Renew spaces are still open. They are using Zoom. So Renew 37 in West Bridgford has got over 100 people using Zoom through the week to connect with each other. And we're thinking really hard about how we use social media in ways that make it safe and accessible for the most vulnerable and the most anxious, so that we can keep providing safe space, even if it's in the dreaded Zoom. So there is still Renew happening. It's just online. I'm still doing mine in WhatsApp, which is great fun, but also great to be still supporting people that we've been working with for a long time.
Yeah, and I see one of the comments coming in from Pamela Price that says, indeed, that's what's been happening, a Renew Wellbeing space being run through online Zoom, so that is possible as well. We're going to hear again in a moment from our mystery contributor. But Nikki and Stuart, before we do that, is there anything particular that you want to just add about other ways that you really think we could support and help? Nikki?
It's more just to a concern about exclusion in some ways. I think a lot of the technology has been great, and it's been lovely to see how the creativity of all that. But for a lot of older people, that they're frightened of it, but also they may not have it. And for a lot of people where money is a real issue, and often people with mental health whose lives have perhaps been more chaotic, haven't always got the money to access internet. And you can feel more excluded. If you've just found a church at home and everyone else in your house group is doing all this stuff on Zoom and you can't, that can be really hard and make you feel even more out on a limb. I know that Justin Welby has done a telephone line now for older people, particularly a daily worship thing, Daily Hope. So just be mindful in our congregations of people who are older. If you're the carer and your partner's got dementia and you haven't got high-tech stuff, it can be really hard in the lockdown. So just to remind people of that, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to hear again from the lady who suffers from anxiety and depression, and she has made some suggestions of what she appreciates in the help that she has been given by friends and church members. So I'm going to share that. I guess it's a 4-minute clip this time. All being well, we'll again try the technology once more. But as we're listening to that, please do also just add some comments if you want to, or some questions, and we'll address those after listening to this clip.
So how do I get through this strange time I find myself in? Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I can share with you things that have helped me. Feel free to ignore them all, but even if there's just one idea that you think might help someone who's struggling, then I'm happy to share my thoughts. So here goes. Here are things that I've found helpful. Accessing church online. You can be there, but you can choose whether to put the camera on or not. There's no pressure to speak, and it gives you some control in a world that feels out of control at the moment. Video calls like FaceTime and Zoom to remind you that people are still there, but with an understanding that you don't have to answer if you don't feel able to. Texts from friends with no pressure to reply. Just knowing you are being thought of can break into the loneliness. Going old school and receiving post, a simple card that just says hello. A friend leaving you a meal by your front door and texting you to let you know it's there so you can decide if you're up for seeing someone. That wonderful action lets you know you've been thought of and not forgotten. Plus, it really helps with trying to eat properly, which can be a real struggle when you have depression. Texting to say you are doing your daily walk past their house that day and if they want to wave from the window. An invitation to eat a meal together over Zoom. This next one might not be everyone's cup of tea, but for me, having a purpose to my day helps as long as I can say no on a bad day. Is there something you could ask a person to do from their home with plenty of time to do it? Things like proofreading a church newsletter, write cards to the elderly in the congregation, come up with a craft that the kids in church can do, something that gives some value and purpose to that person. Text to simply say hello or share an encouragement. It's okay to ask someone how they are, but with an acceptance that they might not be able to answer, because that is a really huge question. So I guess it would be helpful to only ask it if you're really happy to receive the honest answer. Encourage them to keep a gratitude journal and check in every now and then to ask how it's going. Pray for them. for safety through this time and the courage to not withdraw too much. But if they do, that they'll have even more courage to reconnect when this is over. And lastly, but really importantly, please don't give up. It's hard to support someone with mental health difficulties, especially if you don't get anything positive back. Just please know that hanging in there with them is one of the most amazing things you can do, because it completely goes against the negative thoughts they have of being no good and unlovable. By simply being there and accepting them on the bad days as well as the good, you show a little bit of Jesus shining a light in the darkness. Thank you for giving me the chance to share with you and for taking the time to listen. I hope it helps.
Well, yes, it does, is the answer. Thank you to that person for sharing those thoughts, and particularly that appeal at the end to hang in there with someone when it is not always easy, and when solutions don't just tumble out. That's not really what this is about. So very, very helpful thoughts. We've got a few questions which I'm going to address to Sarah and Stuart and to Nikki. And one of them is just asking about how it's very hard to support people on the phone. I just wonder if you got, I'm going to ask Stuart, perhaps I'm going to land it with him. It is hard to contact people and to have that depth of conversation when it's not face to face. Are there any hints you would have, any clues as to how we can do that well?
I think it is hard, and I think if you've had an intense phone call with somebody, you will need a gap. You know, a lot of ministers, I think, are phoning their church members at the moment. If you were visiting your church members, you'd have 10 minutes of a journey in between one and another, and you need just as much on the phone, because I think you need to be on the top of your game. You need to listen really well. So I think just to say, don't underestimate how tiring it is, and how hard listening is. It's not an easy thing. You have to give it your all.
Yeah. The particular issue raised here by Sandra Crawford, who made this comment, is silences are fine when you are in the room with the person. Silences on the phone have a particular awkwardness. Nikki, Sarah, I don't know, any of you, I don't know whether there's a way that you dealt with that. Maybe just acknowledge it up front that it might happen, perhaps.
I think so. I had a situation in my Renew WhatsApp group that caused a long apparent silence, no one typing anything for a long time. And I think we were all sitting there thinking, I don't know what to say. But actually it was right that we didn't just rush in to trot out platitudes. I think, yeah, it's hard to work out the etiquette, but it's worth doing, I think. And acknowledging that it's hard is important, and saying, this is strange, isn't it? But let's not just witter on for the sake of wittering.
Yeah.
You can say or type still here.
Yeah.
I'm still here. And that's
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So name the awkwardness and just remind them that you're still present, and in an unrushed fashion for them. Yeah.
Silences can be very, very good.
Yeah.
You know, a lot happens in the silences.
Yeah. So we have another question, this one from Bernice Lingard. It says, are there any advice on particular Bible passages that might help those who have mental health difficulties? Also, how do you pray for and with people who are struggling? So I'm going to turn again to the chaplains here. I guess that in your circumstances, you're often reaching for scripture and offering prayer. Are there particular passages you go to time and again, or are you drawing from across the range of scripture?
I mean, the Psalms are good, echo a lot of things. You know, Psalm 23 is enormously helpful. You know, it's so familiar, isn't it? But we sometimes forget, and that is really, really useful. The end of Philippians 4, I quite often go to about whatever is good, whatever is pure, whatever is think on these things. That can be helpful. They're the two that, and Romans as well. Nothing can separate us from God's love.
Yeah.
Romans 8. That's another really helpful one. But just, you know, reading some of the stories of Jesus and how he was with people, you know, coming alongside them, eating with them. I found in recent weeks, with Easter falling in this period, just thinking of some of the resurrection experiences is hugely helpful. If you think of the ones in John, Mary distraught, overwhelmed with grief, the whole world falling apart, and Jesus just comes and calls her name. And then in the locked room, apposite for so many reasons, terrified disciples, not on earth knowing what to come. Jesus comes, stands in the middle, and says, "Peace be with you." And Jesus then going alongside the people on the road who were trying to understand, trying to make sense of the enormity of what was going on. He talks to them and then breaks bread with them. And I think those, resurrection experiences have been very helpful in the work I've been doing recently.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Sarah, one for you perhaps. Comment here from Pete Maycock. Being unrushed in listening is great, but he says, how do we do that when we're busy with many demands on our time as ministers? Sarah, do you do all this stuff yourself, or have you got a team, and have you set that up? How do you lean on others?
Renew runs on teams and gets people involved. But I think at the core of it, it's about this isn't something we do to other people. This is something that we have ourselves, that we cultivate our own inner stillness and quietness, and that takes time to learn and grow in that. So I noticed Peter's comment, and I'm an activist, so for me to slow down and stop any situation is a challenge. But we're learning habits of. There's a message version of a scripture that says something about the unforced rhythms of grace, and actually learning ourselves to slow down and stop, and then we're able to offer that to other people and to sit in that with other people and say, actually, it's okay to sit here still and quiet and not saying very much, because that's what we're learning ourselves to do. And actually, for us as pastors, to learn to do that ourselves and just go, actually, it's okay to sit here and do nothing for a while, and look for God in that stillness and peace. And sometimes we don't feel able to do that because of the pressures on us, but we perhaps need to care for ourselves as well and do that.
Yeah. Yes. So uncomfortably for activists, and guilty of charge. We actually have to learn ourselves here. We have to shift ourselves to accommodate other people. Yeah, thank you. And looking at some of the other comments, again, another comment about phone messaging and how you deal with the lack of body language, which otherwise you would normally be reading when you're speaking to people over the phone. But I think we mentioned one or two hints towards that. Also an interesting comment. It says here, I've found much in the media really unhelpful. Sources of good information and support, which are optimistic, hopeful and realistic, are essential, or hope is essential. So again, do you find yourself pointing people towards good news stories and trying to move people away from negative stories? I mean, if you are consuming the news, it is a fairly bleak picture day by day at the moment.
I think I suppose it's possible to do that. I think we need to look at the dark things as well as the good things in life. But what bothers me more is that the media isn't real. It's a slick world of beautiful people, and everything is successful. We had a very minor technology problem at the start of this with this webinar, and that's the real world. And you'll get that if you look at your church worship online. It will not be like BBC production values. And I think that's good. I think the homemade and the human is the amateur. Yeah, in the sense, literally comes out of ammo, doesn't it? Love, and it's human, and it's non-threatening, and that's what we're all like, all of our lives. And so I think to dial back on the media and on all those Hollywood films where sooner or later somebody will produce a gun and shoot somebody else. That's the world of the big screen. It's not the real world, and so I don't think I would recommend people turn away from difficult subjects, but look a bit closer home.
Yeah. Okay.
I think some of the ancient sort of spiritual practices are good. A lot of the Ignatian spirituality about, thinking of the things you're grateful for, as well as thinking of the things that you'd like to work on. And that's a very simple thing, but it's not a bad way to sort of pause in the day and think of the good things actually that are here, as well as the things that aren't so good. And we were talking about the problems of telephone calls, and there are some good things about them, but actually they're not as good as face-to-face. And we need to value the good things about the face-to-face contacts when we have them, and not just take them for granted. But the amount of extra stuff you do see in the body language and the things we communicate more than just the words, those things are really special and are wonderful human gifts. And we just, are blasé to them most of the time with our texts and little, screenshots. And that the one-to-one human contact is, a wonderful gift. It's what incarnation is, isn't it, really? And, we sometimes forget that. And while it's good to use the other things, we mustn't forget that wonderful gift too.
And you talked about, praying for people, Sarah, the Renew spaces, you use prayer, you said. Again, in what way? You're talking about praying directly for people, or leading them through liturgy, or a bit of both? And what's your pattern of prayer?
No, we don't pray for people in that way. What we're sharing is the habits of prayer that we are learning ourselves. And so depending on the Renew space, we have rhythms of prayer. So some places that are open all day will have morning prayer, noon prayer, and end of day prayer. My particular Renew, we meet on a Friday afternoon, so we finish with prayer. But we finish, actually, the way we do it, you perhaps wouldn't immediately recognise it, but it is an Ignatian examen. So we ask people to look for, to reflect back on their day and look for the moments of goodness and blessing in their day, and to name those if they feel able, and to also reflect on the times when they didn't feel blessed, and to take an opportunity to just acknowledge those. And to do that, to know that we're doing that in the presence of God, perhaps, or whatever. But our aim is that in those habits, people are able to join in with them, rather than having them done to them. So we don't do praying for, we do, this is what we're doing, you're welcome to join in or not. But prayer is right at the heart of what we do in Renew, because prayer is a good thing.
So an invitation for them to participate in the way that they wish to. I'm looking at the comments, and I think most of them we have probably tackled or mentioned, but just another minute or two, if anybody else wants to add a comment or question, please do so. Just having a quick flick through. Again, others who have set up, someone here who set up a private Facebook group where people can continue to support each other. So again, using the technology in ways that continue that contact with one another. So I'm just going to wait a moment and see if any further questions come in. As we do so, again, any further thoughts, Nikki, Stuart, or Sarah, anything that you really feel needs to be said that hasn't been said?
I'm just musing on a telephone call and the text message and the WhatsApp group and the email and the postcard and the face-to-face when that's possible. But there are so many ways of communicating. There used to be one or two, didn't there? But now there are multiple ones, and we know some people will respond to a message on Facebook. They won't respond to anything else. Some people, you've actually got to phone their landline. I don't know. They all have their advantages and disadvantages, I think. Some are more pushy than others. I think it's quite interesting learning what works for different people and having multiple versions. And, I still have a friend who prefers to correspond by a letter with a stamp in the corner. And I just think it's great. All these different things. You can communicate with somebody by knocking on the pipe on the prison cell, can't you? And we will find a way.
And in all these ways, some of which are new to us and some of which are very personal. You're suddenly in somebody's front room or possibly in somebody's bedroom if they're on their computer. Sarah, any thoughts about safeguarding with regard to that new way of working?
Yes, obviously I have a particular interest because of children and young people, and I think we need to think through our safeguarding. There are guidelines on the Baptist website specifically addressing using social media, and so do have a look at those, because those are really helpful. But also it applies in online spaces with people who are vulnerable for whatever reason, and you need to be thinking around things to do with consent. Do people understand that everyone can hear them, and that we can see their bedroom and all of that kind of thing? But also having more than one adult present in Zoom spaces and things like that, or more than one host in Zoom spaces, and just being a bit thoughtful about it. But there's loads of advice out there to follow. So don't not use technology because of safeguarding. There are ways to make it safe and ways to make it practical. But you do need to think about it a bit, and perhaps make sure you're covering yourself on safeguarding and GDPR as well. Okay.
Thank you.
But it's possible.
And as you said, there are more guidelines on the BE website about that.
Yeah.
Well, I think I haven't seen any further comments come in other than those thanking us for the webinar. So I appreciate those affirmations. Thank you. So I think we'll draw it to a halt there. And I just want to thank you, Sarah and Stuart and Nikki, for joining me. Really appreciate that. And I'll say goodbye to you now, just as I wrap things up. So thank you for taking part. So if I can, as we finish, just remind people one or two things. First of all, the recording will be on the website afterwards. You're most welcome to go to it again. There's also a help sheet on there, so it's got some links to some of the websites you can go to, particularly in supporting children and young people. Also, the comments made by our mystery contributor about what we can do, simple things we can do to support those with mental health. They also are on that sheet as well, on that web page, so you can have a look and make a note of those if you want reminding. And then just a quick reminder, we've got a prayer broadcast tonight at 7 o'clock. That's with Lynn Green and Mark Massey from The Free in Frinton. And again, next Wednesday, our webinar topic is The Church Gathered and Scattered. And that's with Paul Fiddis, Anthony Reddy and Sally Nelson, considering how we embody Christ when we cannot physically meet. Do join me then at 1 p.m. next Wednesday. But for the moment, I'm going to conclude just with a brief prayer and a blessing. So thinking of ourselves and all those we may be seeking to support. Now may the God of all peace make you whole and holy. May he keep you safe, body, mind and spirit, ready for his presence. He has called you. He is faithful. He will do it. Amen.